So first of all,
Right.
give me a 2-minute kind of a perspective on, what siren called you to Oregon wine.
Oh, okay.
Where's the trail?
Oh, okay. Um, I guess I consider that the luckiest guy on the planet syndrome. Think about it like this: when you're a young person and you're just coming in school, tertiary school, or just coming out of tertiary school, quite often you don't know where you want to live and you don't know what you want to do. And on the other hand, some of my buddies that I went to college with are still saying, well, Rollin knew what he wanted to be. I mean, nobody knows that. When I was a junior in college
Where was that?
in Texas,
In Texas?
Texas A&M,
Uh-huh.
and so I got a chance to go and work in a vineyard in Switzerland for the summer.
Uh-huh.
And I just loved it. I just loved it. And so that stimulated me to for a number of reasons. One, it was opened up doors to the entire world. There aren't very many ugly places where they grow vines, so the doors open. Making wine and growing grapes is like having a common language across the globe. So as a young person, I thought, wow, that's cool. I can work anywhere in the world with. That's beautiful with this thing. It brought in my science background, which is microbiology and plants and biology, and it was awesome. Brought that in, and I got exposed in Switzerland to winemakers from the Italian side, the French side, and the German side, and they were just so enthusiastic and so intelligent and enjoyed life, and it was just really stimulatory. So I went back to A&M for my senior year and said, I'm going to go make wine.
Uh-huh.
And one of my other professors said, well, if you're going to do that, you need to get a master's degree from Davis. So, okay. So I applied to school in Davis, and I got accepted. I think they thought I was a foreign student with my accent, so they had a quota. So I started
From Texas?
Exactly. So there I go to Oregon, and as a young person, I had nothing. I had my little white Volkswagen Beetle stuffed with all my worldly possessions, and I slept in the parking lot for probably 3 weeks because I had no place to live, and it's a tight campus, and I'm standing there looking at the bulletin board trying to find a place to live, and this guy hears my accent and goes, are you from Texas? I go, yeah. And he turned out to be from the University of Texas, and he's looking for a place to stay.
Uh-huh.
And he had run into an Oregonian that grew up in Hood River and said, this guy's found a house and he needs 2 roommates. So we got this guy, and it turns out he wanted to study wine as well.
Oh, is that right?
And so that's in late 78. So in 79, we made a trip up here to visit this Oregon guy's family in Hood River. Well, we stopped at every winery we could find and all the way up, and the enthusiasm here was phenomenal. All the early guys that started making wineries, they're making no money, so you make up profit with good humor, and their doors are open. We tried all these wines, good and bad, and the moment I got to the Willamette Valley, I knew, without even visiting a winery, I knew this is where I wanted to live.
What was the attraction? I mean, what was it?
It was just beautiful. We came up, it was like the Emerald City, and everything was green. Coming from Texas, that's not always that way. And the big trees and the beautiful hills and the ocean and the mountains, and Hood River was awesome, the whole thing. And then the enthusiasm of this pioneering group of people, I just thought, you know what, I can come here and I would love to live here. One, I found the occupation that I want to do, and I think there's like a diamond in the rough type mentality here, so I can actually make an impact as a young person trained in the Oregon wine industry. So think about it. I don't know what I am, early 20s. I find the place that I love the most, and I still do. I pinch myself when I walk out the door of my house and look at the sky and the trees and the hills, and it's just gorgeous here. I can't think of any place I'd rather live in. I travel the world. So at early 20s, I knew where I wanted to live. Early 20s, I knew what I wanted to do. And so all I had to do was put that all together and become the best that I could be doing that. It's a gift. It's a total, I'm so lucky, I'm so blessed to have had that experience of having both those things come together for me and make a home here in Oregon.
How does it compare, like the wine industry in Switzerland, which we don't normally hear very much about, and when you came into the Willamette, you know, going up, and there weren't that many, when you were coming through here, there weren't that many wineries here. How did, you know, like the culture and how did the wine industry compare?
Well, the business side of it, there's no comparison because the European guys have been doing it for centuries, and so they have what would be called a mature industry, whereas in Oregon it was incredibly immature, and people were still trying to find their way, and the quality was up and down. Americans are classic. When I first made Argyle wine and went out to sell it, I'd go out, and the first thing I had to do, before I could get to showing them my wines, was to explain where Oregon was on the map. And the second thing was to convince them, their skeptic nature, that there's no way you grow grapes in Oregon. All I heard is that it rains all the time.
Uh-huh.
And so, I mean, that was always an impediment to actually getting people to be excited about any Oregon wine.
And this is where you're trying to sell the wines where?
In the U.S.
But where? I mean, like New Mexico?
Anywhere.
New York?
Anywhere. I don't think guys in Washington know where Oregon is. I'm exaggerating.
Well, it's north of California.
It was always in people's mind, and Oregon to some extent is that way today. Yeah, it's California, and then Washington, and then you're in Canada. And so that's slowly changing. But, you know, think of the demographics of Oregon. You know, when I moved here, there was probably 2 million people or something like that in a huge state. But anyway, the difference was a mature business versus an immature business, one. Number two, an immature business is defined by not knowing what varietal is going to do the best here. But the similarities with, say, a Switzerland or the cooler areas of Europe are that this is a cool growing place. Many of the cool growing places in Europe are in the rain shadow of something like a range of some sort, and that our slopes, our vineyards are all on hillside slopes here, and the coolest places in Europe are on hillside slopes. So those places don't have enough sunlight and heat to ripen, you know, say Pinot Noir or a Chardonnay or a Riesling, and therefore they have to locate all their best vineyards are all located on southern and eastern slopes on thin soils. And we come to Oregon, we don't have enough sunlight and heat to ripen Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Riesling either. So all our vineyards have to be located on these warm sites. If we had enough sunlight and heat, you'd see grapes down on the valley floor here, and you know, and all that kind of stuff like you do in many valleys of California.
And the idea of the slope is like it catches more, what do we call it, like heat from the sun then?
Yeah, what you're figuring out is everything you can do for a plant to make use of the limited sunlight and heat. So if you're getting the first light of day, that's great. If you're on shallow soils, then the vine stops growing and putting energy into growing, and puts more energy into ripening fruit. Shallow soils are warmer earlier. The sun hits them and it warms them up, and the vines get started earlier. So there's many advantages. Think of it like maybe like the reason he put photovoltaic arrays facing south, or east and south, they're trying to attract as much sunlight as they can as well. So vines are like big solar arrays, you know, it takes sunlight to strike the leaf and produce fruit flavor. Well, that leaf has to be warm in order for the machinery of photosynthesis to happen. Sunlight brings warmth.
So how's a winemaker's job? Well, first let me ask you, what exactly does a winemaker do?
Well, there's different definitions. I guess you could say, what's a wine grower and a winemaker? And in Oregon, you're forced to be more of a wine grower to be really.
Like, I think their word for for like a winemaker is actually wine grower, I think.
Right. And so wine growers, better definition, if you truly want to capture consistent high quality in a cool growing region like Willamette Valley. So as a winemaker, your year begins really with pruning the vines for balance.
What do you,
And
what
you need to,
specifically, what are you looking at, like to get balance by pruning the vines?
so you can't really go specifics because it's balance.
You're looking at
Balance is subjective, and balance is many entities in one. So it's probably not. I'd just leave it at balance and call it good. You're looking for the vines to be balanced in such a way that at the end of the growing season, you're producing the very highest quality of fruit that you could possibly produce. And that requires balancing many elements out in the vineyard. Then the winemaker has to make a good decision, which we talked about earlier, about when to take that fruit off the vine, that it has, adequate flavor or optimum flavor to make the wines that you want to make. And then the wine grower becomes a winemaker, and your objective is to capture all that work that you've done to create great fruit flavor in the vineyard and not lose it, but also to enhance it and make it even better. And then that takes the rest of the year and more.
So what's the thought process? Like there's two segments, and like let's focus on the part like after harvest. What's the thought process to not lose the flavors and enhance it? Like what are you thinking about? What are 5 things that you're thinking about? Especially here in Oregon, as opposed to Italy.
Well, that's the same. Thinking the same thing.
Same thing.
I mean, there's many cool regions of Italy too. I don't know. It's your issue, and it's many of the issues in your walk of life are the same issues that you have in your regular life, and those are one of the primary goals that many people forget about, that's important to making their life better, is to have inbuilt flexibility in your attitude. And so we see many people get fixed in their attitude and therefore they use that inflexible belief as their prism for all decision making. Well, in agriculture, in a cool climate, if you're fixed in your thinking that, which means, well, you know what, for the last year I did this and it worked just great, so that becomes my standard operating procedure. Well, in the cool climate like Oregon, Mother Nature is going to throw you a curveball, and you're not really going to understand why you have this standard operating procedure, and you have eliminated your thought process, much less the processing process in your winery, for example, to limit or eliminate any flexibility. So flexibility is the juice of life. It's the juice of successful winemaking in a cool climate too. Inflexibility is obviously not the juice of life, and inflexibility cannot lead to one striving to the highest standards that they can possibly be input for their wines.
So where and how did you learn that lesson?
Mother Nature taught it to me.
Can you give me a specific, was there a day that you said, oh, it's like, yeah, I understand, or I really blew this?
There's never a specific date, and there's never one single aha. It's impossible. What happens with Mother Nature in this cool climate is no two vintages are even remotely the same. We get the coldest, followed by the hottest, followed by the wettest, followed by the driest, and a mixture of those elements.
Yeah.
And so you actually over time get reminded of lessons that you should have learned, and you get taught new lessons continually. The whole part of life is to continually improve oneself and to strive for change. Change is inevitable, and anytime you try to limit change, Mother Nature's going to come around and slap you around.
So,
So every vintage I go through, I have another aha and another learning. Every one of them.
what was an aha like for, say, this year for you? Something that kind of comes to mind that you say, oh yeah, I remember that, or oh,
For winemaking?
yeah. And it could be, it could be like when to harvest, or
Yeah. Well, part of the inbuilt flexibility that I've had to strive has been forced upon me as well by my business plan for Argyle. At Argyle, we have a very complicated winemaking, grape growing business plan. One, we farm our own acreage, which means that we have the complication of taking all the credit, but also all the problems with farming correctly or incorrectly. So then you follow that complexity with making many different kinds of wines here, and we make sparkling wine, and we high quality sparkling wine, high quality white wines, and high quality red wines. And each one of those requires a different skill set, and it lends another large bit of complexity. If you just made one, you would eliminate the other two, and your life would become a lot easier. So that's the downside to that thing, is that we're too complex, and quite often people in the world want to be this inflexible nature, and they want to simplify their lives, and they want to believe that, well, if I buy Argyle, they make one thing right, and that's it, and that's all. So I go to Argyle for this wine. I don't go there for other wines. Well, I can't do that. In my business plan that was created, I didn't make it to be that, because I love making all those wines. I love drinking all those wines, and I can do a good job on all of them. Well, the advantage to that is a long answer, is that in a vintage like the recent vintage we had, which is 2007, two things that are advantageous. 2007 was perhaps, I don't know what it was, my 22nd vintage in Willamette. So no two vintages are the same. I remember every one of them like it was yesterday. So I can relate back to those 22 years. That's an advantage. Second advantage, with our complex business plan, I remember I get to go out in the vineyard earlier than most folks, because we are harvesting grapes for sparkling wine, which are quite often harvested a bit earlier than you might do for still wines. And so I get out in the vineyard earlier, tasting fruit. Then I'm out tasting the fruit. I reflect on at the same time what the summer was like in the growing season, and I look at the data as well to back me up. And I think, well, you know what? This feels like 2000, like the year 2000 growing season. Then I look at the data for the weather data that we collect, and I go, sure enough, it's pretty dang close to 2000. So what happened? What did I learn in 2000? In 2000, what happened? We had a cool summer. It was freezing to go camping in Oregon's wilderness in the summer of 2000. We about got froze out of many places in August. We had to pull up the tent and say, "To heck with this, get out of here," which is unheard of. Well, we had a growing season like that in 2007. When we went camping, it was bloody cold out there, and so you remember that. So what happens is you don't metabolize a lot of acid out of the grapes. So you go out and you taste the grapes. They have a lot of acid that's masking the fruit flavor that potentially is in that grape. And in 2000, I took a gamble, and I picked my sparkling fruit thinking that it may not have the right amount of fruit. And we squeezed it, put it in a tank, started selling it, and a couple days later I tasted the juice, and it was like, oh my God, where did all this flavor come from? It was being masked by all that acid that was in the grape. So it gave me confidence that in the year 2000 that I could go and pick red grapes and white grapes at a slightly earlier than I would think stage from a flavor point of view, and probably end up with some bloody good wine. And it turned out to be such a case. So one, I was reflecting on another vintage. Number two, I was out sampling and tasting grapes 2-3 weeks earlier than I normally would if I only made red wine. And 3, because I made sparkling wine, I got to strike first blood, taste that juice, and realize that it was chock full of flavor. So then the forecast comes out in 2005-07, where predicted to have these fairly large cold rain events. And so, having picked a little bit of sparkling a few days ahead of that, and being satisfied that, like 2000, we had great flavor in our sparkling wine 2007s, it gave me confidence to pull the trigger on picking a little earlier than I normally would by just a few days. But given the forecast, it wasn't such a great sacrifice. And it turns out, and so we pulled the trigger, and we pulled in over half of our crop before the very first rain, which was over an inch of rainfall. 2 days later, we got over 2 inches of rainfall. And so we held off for the other 40% until after all this rain, and picked later and made wine out of that. And now I'm able to taste before the rain and after the rain. And the before the rain is so creamy and so fruit forward and beautiful and complex compared to after the rain, that it turns out that I made the right decision. Well, that right decision was based on, like I said, the experience, the experience in the sparkling wine. I say this over and over again. Because I sparkling wine, my white wines are better. Because I make high quality white wines, my red wines are better.
What, like in 2000, the first time that you had experienced like that cold weather.
Cold growing season.
That cold growing season. What in your personality allows you to cope with or make that kind of a decision? Because like now in 2007, you can look back to 2000 and you can be more, you could sleep better at night, or a lot of people could sleep better at nights because they have something to base their decision on. But if in 2000, it's like you're going kind of cold turkey, kind of describe like were you anxious, what kind of thought process did you have?
No, in the inclement years, the decision to pick, and from my point of view, is paramount. And so I just grind my hamster wheel goes constantly. My stomach grinds. It's totally anxiety ridden. But the way to deal with anxiety is to actually get out and taste these grapes over and over and over and over. And in the end, when you make that final decision, you have to fall back and trust what's called intuition. And hopefully, you and I are older now, and maybe we understand what our parents were all about a little better now, and believing that, as you get older, I think if you've led a life that in which you're allowing yourself to grow each year, you've allowed yourself to trust more and more your intuition. So with age comes greater trust and greater intuition. And with youth, those things don't exist. And so the year 2000, I would have been making wine for 15 years. And so I just had this intuition that it was the right thing, and so you just monitor it.
You kind of already touched on one of the questions I was going to ask you. Is like, what has the vineyard or Pinot, whichever way you want to go, taught you about life?
Pretty much I already answered that.
Yeah.
Again, just to be flexible, be willing to change, and continually improve yourself. Continually improve.
Improve yourself in what way?
Continue to try to not so much make yourself a better person, but continue to look at ways to become a better person, continue to find ways to enjoy life more and more, to, ways to, there's always something to be learned. Try to be open. We, in the vineyards, one of my mentors is our chairman of Argyle, one of the pioneering grape growers here, and that guy, if does it make better grapes, then is it better viticulture, then let's do it. And he doesn't fall back on, well, the grapes are just good enough. We're great 5 years ago, so they must be great now. No, he's always pushing the envelope. And we tear out perfectly good vines, which are planted in an old viticultural pattern or style, and we replace it with better viticulture, better clones, totally, continually improving himself as well as the vineyard. And that's what you can learn. You can run a vineyard like you run your life, continually improve yourself.
So that's why up at the Knudsen Vineyard, saw a lot of vines being pulled and new vines being
right.
Replaced there.
Right.
What did you pull and what did you replace it with, just out of curiosity?
Well, think about it. The viticulture that existed at Knudsen's was viticulture that was considered their state-of-the-art back in 1972 and 1974. Well, 30 years later, hopefully we've been doing something to learn more about Pinot Noir and how to grow vines in this climate. And we have. At Oregon, and through our farming enterprise that we run, we've made incredible strides in improving quality on so many different levels. So we just use all those learnings that we have, and replace old vines with the new learnings.
What makes like these red hills that let's see, all of your vines are in, no, you've got some down a little bit south.
Yeah, we're Eola Amity Hills too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What makes this area so special, for growing grapes? Wine grapes?
It's a broad answer. I think our sunlight and heat are amounts are conducive to late fruit ripening. And if you think about it like this, many people in the world love to garden, and they love seeing fruit trees and all this kind of stuff. What I think about is many times the last vegetables in your vegetable garden before the frosts come quite often have the most vibrancy to them, and the flavor and vibrancy together. The last tomatoes can be awesome. If you pick apples at the end of the growing season, those apples are wonderful. The pears are awesome. All those kind of things are just awesome. And so people are always seeking better flavor. Our walnuts here are stunners. They're the most pure essence of walnut flavor because they're ripe. They're basically falling on the ground not until November. And so that's late ripening. All of our grape varietals here that we grow are cool climate varietals, but yet they're ripening when the leaves on the trees are changing color, when the animals that migrate are migrating, the animals that hibernate are hibernating, and there's not enough sunlight and heat to further ripen tomatoes and apples and grapes and all that kind of stuff. And so if you ripen Pinot Noir and ripen Chardonnay and ripen Riesling, etc., and you look out and the leaves on the trees are changing color, and you got a small crop on the vines, that's a cool climate, and that's ripening at the end of the growing season. Lends you the most vibrancy in the fruit and vibrancy in the wine.
What about like the culture that's here, like the winemaking culture? Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe compare it to other places.
I think the culture here is one of cooperation and one of bonhomme, and we all seem to get along really well. There's probably even pressure to get along, where we wouldn't want somebody to come in and be a jerk and not share ideas and not and not be, be a NIMBY. It's just not allowed around here. And so it's nice. My philosophy at Argyle has always been, I'll show grape growers and winemakers from around the world everything that I do down to the itty-bittiest detail. And whatever they take away from that, even if they copied it like a recipe, the wine that they go back and make is going to be probably head and shoulders different than what my wine is. And so there's not any of this proprietariness and that's infectious to growth. Proprietary attitudes just won't make this place a better place. So Oregon wine growers, I mean, we've all got friends around the world that make wine, and they act the same way. I can go into many cellars and get to shown around and all the great little details, and it's just such a sharing, fun community. And then think about this, we're making a product that's basically a food product, and we all love having a good time and eating and enjoying life, and so we do all this study in each other's cellars, and then we go out for lunch or we go out for dinner, and it's just a common language again. Yeah. I visit guys that speak zero English. I speak practically no Italian or French or German, just enough to be deadly, and it's like we could spend the week together and still not fill the time up. It's awesome. It's a great feeling.
And so you find, you're saying that same culture of cooperation exists like within, like let's say the Burgundy wine area, and also in the Tuscany wine area, in various Australian wine areas, that they also have that same, within that region, cooperation.
Yeah, maybe to a greater or lesser extent, but there's always some cooperation amongst the wine growing regions. Rising tide lifts all boats. Uh-huh. And what gets in the way quite often could be large investment, so people feel more threat that they're going to lose that investment, maybe their risk factor goes up, or investment from entities that have never been in the wine business before and have been in other businesses where that proprietary nature has been paramount to their success. And so those kind of attitudes don't transfer to something that's agricultural like the wine industry. Basically, growing grapes, making wine, and the business of growing grapes and making wine is an agricultural enterprise. And the biggest risk we have is Mother Nature, not that somebody's going to steal our secrets.
Yeah. One of the things, like this area is really known for its the Pinot Noir. What's so special about Oregon Pinot? I mean, even in California, it's like I had a dealings with an attorney, and he asked me to pay him in Pinot, Oregon Pinot, rather than cash.
Smart attorney.
Yeah.
Really smart.
Yeah, he got a bottle of yours too.
Oh, that's good. Smart boy. Smart boy. Well, I think we've touched on it a little bit. We can't ripen Merlot. We can't ripen Cabernet. We can't ripen Sauvignon Blanc. We can't ripen the varietals that require a little bit more sunlight and heat. In fact, we don't have enough sunlight and heat to even ripen Pinot Noir. Otherwise, we'd have Pinot Noir, like I said, on the valley floor everywhere. So there's special sites on hillsides, and there aren't very many of those available in the Willamette Valley, where there's just enough sunlight and heat to ripen a red varietal, which happens to be Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir turns out to be a varietal that needs to begin life late in the calendar year and end life late in the calendar year from a point of view of ripening its fruit. So when you find an area that has limited sunlight and heat, and it's sunlight and heat, you can go to some areas in the world where they have not enough heat but plenty of sunlight, and the Pinot Noir is not quite as exciting, I don't think. So we need to have both limitations placed on us that we have to find these special places to grow. And for some reason, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay just really expresses itself in a really vibrant nature here in our Willamette Valley. So, what it specifically is, in general, it's that. Specifically, who knows? It's great.
Yeah.
There aren't very many regions in all the world where you can grow grapes with this kind of in these kind of conditions. It just seems to work.
And like, some of the other regions that we hear about, obviously in France and Burgundy, and then New Zealand, I guess, is kind of up and coming. Can you taste the difference? Or when you taste, like, say, like a Pinot from New Zealand, what do you taste differently than, say, one from just right here in your backyard?
Well, it all depends. They all taste somewhat different, and a trap to fall into is to, unfortunately, is to line up a bunch of Pinots from different regions and taste through them and then make a conclusive remark about this Pinot from here tastes like this and this Pinot from here tastes like that, because each one of those wines will interact with the other wine. So you can taste some regions' Pinot Noirs and go back to another region and it'll ruin the flavor of that region.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you're actually better off apples to apples rather than apples and oranges comparison. So the best thing to do is run flights and get some from Burgundy and taste those and decide, what is it that I like about those. Get a flight of New Zealand Pinots, what is it I like about those, and try to define what those might be.
So wait a day or two and then actually verbalize.
Well, you can do it right then. It doesn't, if you want to.
Yeah.
But you'll find, I would imagine that you'll come up with some commonality of notes across each one of those flights that'll give you some, for your own perspective, notes to compare region to region.
I'm always kind of curious. It's like I'm really interested in soils a lot, in geology and that sort of thing. And I was talking with Varnick Druin and asking her to compare the soils in her area to here, and it was really interesting. And I almost sensed that she thought that the soils were a little better here than they were back in France for growing.
Depends on how you define better.
In terms of like what you can get from from the vine, and it's like she compared like the soil. It's really interesting. Read the book, and then she had just some interesting insights there. I was kind of amazed.
Yeah, in Oregon you have kind of sort of two basic soil types. You got those soils derived from volcanic sources and those derived from sedimentary sources.
Yeah.
And that's about it. But then within those two basic derivations, there's umpteen doodle numbers of conditions: deeper soils, shallower soils, rockier soils, less rocky soils, more acidic, less acidic. Many different permutations in there. And but we're generally young soils, quite fertile young soils here, compared to those soils that might come from more of a tertiary period, where they're older soils and they've had lots more weatherization and all that kind of stuff. And so Burgundian soils are quite different than our soils.
It's interesting. It's like, the Red Hills of Dundee. It's like we hear so much about that. So much is made about that. But, it's like you look at old Laurelwood soil. It's also red.
Yep.
And
but it's volcanic derived dirt that's been blown up. Blown up by the ice age, big winds, and it's basically the topsoil eastern Washington
Yeah.
is what you're talking about with Laurelwood.
Yeah.
It's really rich, deep, beautiful stuff. Yeah. But it's, if you analyze it, it's probably primarily derived from basalt, which full of iron and would look red. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
It's just deeper and comes wind blown rather than direct weatherization, which Dundee Hills are.
Windblown or the floods.
Yeah, below 4,000 feet, it's a melange of all the floods. But then after each flood, there would be a long dry spell with big winds, and the winds must obviously have come from the north and blew the dust and up against the mountain of Chehalem Mountain and stopped the soil from coming further south here.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from.
What'd you sell your first bottle of wine for?
What did I sell it for?
Yeah. What was the price?
I think the first one, Argyle, was our reserve Chardonnay, which we were top 100 in the Wine Spectator
For your
for.
first one?
It's a crack up,
Wow.
1987. And I think at that time we sold it for the ungodly price of $20 a bottle.
And that was in what? What year was that?
1990 probably.
So where'd you get the courage to sell it for $20?
We didn't have very much of it, and that seemed like the going rate at the time.
Uh-huh.
Well, it wasn't the going rate here in Oregon, but it was the going rate with high quality wines like in Napa and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. Let's see. What's your date of birth?
56.
56. And let's see. Where are you born?
I'm a Texas boy.
Texas. And where? Texas is pretty big.
Yeah. Just a lot of my family came from Amarillo, and we lived
Oh, wow.
near Fort Worth.
Uh-huh. I remember hitchhiking through Amarillo, and those people were so friendly.
Oh, they are. Well, they have to be.
Just-
There's
yeah.
nothing else going on
Oh,
there.
Man, they were so friendly. Check. I think that's. Oh, one last question is like, tell me a story, a wine story that either you've like an Oregon wine story that you thought was interesting, either that you experienced personally or that maybe someone else has experienced.
I don't know.
Something that you found maybe was insightful, or it's kind of like a myth.
The guy you ought to talk about in this book for a myth, because it's really cool, because he made up his own myth, is Terry Castile.
I'm going to talk to him Friday.
Ask him for his myth, and that'll seal the deal.
All right.
It's a killer. It's really a fun story, but I mean, it may not come out that good in print, but it's pretty fun towards the end of the evening when everybody's been laughing and carrying on for Terry to take the stage and tell this mythology of how grape growing began in Oregon. It's really pretty fun. It's a great story.
What do you think this area is going to be like in terms of wine culture and wine industry in say 10 years?
I think it's all on the up and up. From a worldwide perspective, the amount of vines planted in Oregon is minuscule compared to even Burgundy. Small regions in Italy, France, Germany are many magnitudes bigger than we are here. So for the size of Oregon industry, we get a lot of attention by the wine cognoscenti and by the wine lovers. It's incredible how much attention we get for our wines. It's way out of proportion with how much investment's gone on in the industry. And so the potential is phenomenal here, and it's untapped. It's still yet to be further tapped. So you'll see a few more vineyards go in. The vineyards are going to, number are going to be limited by the same things that limit Italian places and French places and German places, because you have to be on hillside slopes, et cetera, et cetera. So there won't be this vast planting on the valley floor, and that's going to lend more value to the vines, and it's going to lend more challenge to the wine growers to produce great wine from those, because the value of those vineyards is so high. And I think our culture of sharing ideas and ever improving ourselves is going to lend itself to 10 years' time making more leaps forward in Oregon winedom.
One of the things, like in some areas, like for example in Napa, one of the things that happens is somebody rich goes in, buys a vineyard, and the vineyard prices are extremely high there, and like they hire a winemaker, and like the winemaker's most important job is to get a 95 or better out of Wine Spectator. I mean, that's his whole job. You know, it's like, do you think that might happen here? You know, like with the increase in value of each vine, you know, it takes more and more money.
Well, the sign of success is that the price is higher. You know, sign of success for Google is that their stock price was high when they did their IPO. The sign of success in Bordeaux is that to buy a great vineyard there, you basically can't buy it.
Yeah.
Same in Burgundy, same in Italy, all over the place. So that's a sign of success. But what we lack in America compared to Europe is history. And what you're speaking of is the pressure to produce a 95 score is not the reason why somebody in Europe would buy a great vineyard. They'd buy a great vineyard because the value is there, and it's always been there, and you know, family after family after family have made great wine out of this. So I'm going to buy this vineyard, and I'm going to continue to make great, if someone were to let you buy it. And they wouldn't even dream of worrying about scores. They could care less. Their clientele could care less about scores because they're a mature industry. It's only an immature industry that relies on the crux of scores in order to gauge their success. And so in America, to have enough money to buy an expensive vineyard, just owning the vineyard and knowing its history should be enough, and there shouldn't be any pressure, you know, to worry about the scores. There should be pressure because if you buy a vineyard like that, you want to understand what good wine is. For yourself, you should go in there and taste the wine and go, wow, this is better than I ever remembered it being. You know, great, we're on the right track, and not rely on somebody else to tell you whether or not you're doing a good job or not.
Where is Oregon in that ramp of maturity?
Well, we're in the same. Well, the price of entry here is much lower than the price of entry of Napa. So I think people that get into the wine industry really are intent on not increasing their own personal portfolio, but actually living a lifestyle and trying to make some good wine and jump into the stream with everybody else and participate. And I think that's where Oregonians are now. Where it comes unstuck is when it becomes a luxury brand, and a guy in the wine business here, Bill Hatcher, one of my favorite quotes that he has is, some people that buy, say in Napa, buy vineyards there are the same guys that couldn't afford to buy the Boston Red Sox, so they bought a vineyard in Napa. It could be the Boston Red Sox, or it could be a vineyard in Napa. And people in Oregon that buy vineyards here mostly are actually living on the land and intend to make it part of their life to do. And so it's an investment for them, but it's a more personal investment. And they'd never even thought about buying the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah, because it's out out of their league?
The good news about having to pay more for an asset is that you're more likely to take pains to make sure that the consistency of high quality for which that vineyard was known for is maintained. And so they don't try to just do it on their own and make all the mistakes that bring that history down. They would probably buy a great vineyard. You'd probably ensure that it gets farmed in a great manner and that the wines get made in a great manner. And you would spend as much money making sure that happens as you did on the land that you purchased.
Yeah.
So, professional level. So.
And that's a certain kind of attitude, too, not just professional level. I mean, PERS, when they come in and buy a vineyard area or develop a vineyard, I mean, they have a professional attitude.
Right.
But that's a different kind of a professional attitude than if, some guy that really wants to make wine, starts buying like 1 acre, 2 acres, 5 acres.
But a guy that buys 5 acres of vines and doesn't know how to farm, if it cost them enough to buy that 5 acres, I would bet that they would also spend the money to bring somebody on to walk them through the process of learning how to do it. Yeah. So that's almost anything you do in your life, you're going to hire someone to teach you how to do it. Before you're not going to just go off on your own and expect to be a huge success.
In other words, you just can't go out there and read a book and...
You do it all. You read a book and you get somebody to back you up.
Yeah.
So it takes all of that to learn.
What else should we put in an Oregon wine book?
I don't know, other than Terry Castile's spiel.
All right.
Which is a funny one. But I think he covered it.
All right.
If I think of something, I'll let you know.